Hi, I'm Bill Wiltz of Assured Research. Thanks for tuning into this YouTube summary video of our May 2025 briefing note called Social Inflation Hits Insurers, Less So Economies. Now, this note will be in the May briefing. You've gotten to this video probably through the release of our standalone note, same note that'll appear in the briefing, or notes, I should say. And this is one of two short YouTube videos covering this topic. Released this way because they got to be a bit longer than is our normal fare in the briefing. So we wanted to give you a chance to skim this, to digest it, to dig into those parts of it that you find most interesting. But also, it's really topical. Liability issues on everyone's mind, adverse development on the minds of lots of insurance professionals, tort reform in Georgia, pending as of this recording, is on people's minds, whether it will spread, and social inflation broadly on the minds of many. So seem to be a lot of reasons to get this in your hands, and this hopefully will act as a quick summary. If you'll allow, I'll share the screen. And as I mentioned, this is one of two videos to cover the two notes that are in the briefing. There we go. Okay, so social inflation hits insurers, less so economies. Oh, and here, let me get, pardon me, there we go. This is the start of it on what I wanted to cover. So this is probably the third year that we've intersected data from state level, from states, looked at their GDP growth over many, many years, looked at state liability loss ratios, and then intersected that this year a bit more rigorously than we have in the past, but intersected those first two variables with state liability scores. Now, a quick word on that. So the state liability score taken from a site called Rich States, Poor States, it ranks states, I'd say, viewed from the perspective of a business person or call it an insurance company, ranks states on their tort system. A number of attributes, presumably stability, the judges, so on and so forth. Couple of what you need to remember is a higher liability score is better. Think Delaware and say some of the western states that you see here in the lower left, and then a lower liability score is worse. And there you can think of, say, the traditional hellhole states: Illinois, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, so on and so forth. So higher liability score is better, lower liability score is worse. The first message that I'd want to convey to you, take away from this work, is that if you had the hypothesis that states with high, or that is to say good liability scores, are more likely to have robust economic growth, and maybe economic growth greater than the national average. Conversely, states with lower liability scores, weaker tort systems, are more likely to have below average national growth. This data wouldn't support either hypothesis. What you're looking at presently are the 10 best states ranked on that liability score that I described to you. A lot of those states will be familiar. They're oftentimes cited as having a good, kind of pro-business, let's say, liability tort systems. Clearly a mixed economic record. The black line shows the average GDP growth by state. And we looked at the years 2018 to 2024 just to really hit the worst of this current social inflation period. So mixed economic record. But when you turn to the right and say, okay, but what about how do those same 10 best states, how do they fare when looked at their calendar year liability loss ratios in relation to the national average? There would be some evidence to support an assertion that states with better liability systems, higher liability scores in this case, tend to have lower than average national loss ratios. 2 are clearly worse, but 8 clearly better. Let's turn to the 10 worst states, states with the lowest liability scores. And it's a lot of the states that you would expect: California, Mississippi, New Jersey. Now, Florida and Georgia have recently enacted reforms. Georgia soon to enact reform. just a bit too soon in the 2023 or 2024 data to expect those to have really taken hold. So they stay in this bucket, although perhaps that's now a bit backward looking for those two states. But here again, on the left-hand side, if your assertion was that states with low liability scores, weak systems, tend to have lower than national average economic growth, don't know that it would support that assertion. Maybe a little bit of a signal. You have 3 states better than, equal to, or better than national average, 3 states kind of about the same, or a little bit below, but not so far below. And then you have 4 of the 10 states clearly have laggards from an economic perspective. But you do have a stronger signal on the right-hand side from these states if the assertion was that states with weak liability systems tend to have higher than national average, or just higher liability loss ratios. Here, again, more support for that. You have 5 states with above national average loss ratios, 3 states where it's pretty close to the national average in yellow, and only 2 states where it's better. So keep that in mind, as in terms of, it's relevant, I think, as to thinking about catalysts for reform. If we as an insurance industry just say, well, if a state wants to adjudicate cases that way, that'll be fine. We'll price for it, and their economy will suffer as a result, and that'll be their catalyst to change. That might be a long wait, because there isn't compelling evidence to suggest that the liability system, a weak liability system, kind of retards or slows economic growth. This is in the deck. I just wanted to, and in the research, just wanted to show you we wanted to give you lots of tools that if you're analyzing specific states, you have ways to think about it. And again, we're happy to share information where we're able to do so. I'll point out that on the left-hand side, Georgia's loss ratio, 3-year average, about 12 points worse than the national average across the broad liability products. Commercial auto liability, 4 points higher than the national average. This next slide brings those two together, and asks and answers the question which states have liability, both broad liability and commercial auto liability, higher than the national average. They're in red. And which states have one or the other higher than the national average. Those are in blue. So you see them. The good news is there aren't a lot of them. So if the industry and insurers really focus their efforts on reforms in these states, and Georgia and Florida already have, that could be really impactful. The less good news is that they're big states and difficult to ignore, or impossible to ignore, especially if you're a national or a super regional insurer. The 7 states in red with the high liability loss ratios, they represent 41% of GDP. And the 9 states in blue add another 16% of GDP. So it's difficult to avoid the states with the high liability loss ratios. And I meant to, or should have mentioned, that in those previous 2 charts I showed with the bar graphs on either side, the 10 states with ranking the lowest on the liability score, their collective GDP is 8 times the size of the 10 best states. So the 10 worst states, you'll recall, included California, Nevada, and Texas, and New Jersey and New York. So no surprise that you sum up their GDPs, it's a lot bigger than those of the 10 best states. So again, same idea. You can't ignore those states. We're going to end with this slide. This was an aha moment for me professionally when a smart reinsurance subscriber said, hey, you look at industry-wide premiums, as a percentage of GDP. If we're looking and we want to narrow our lens to look just at liability, why not look at liability premiums as a percentage of GDP? And it was a great insight, or it led to this, I think, great insight. Smart question led to a good insight that you see the expected pattern, peaks in the hard market of the mid-'80s, the 9/11 era, and today. But it's notable, very notable, I would suggest, that the liability premiums today are higher as a percentage of GDP than they were in the 9/11 at the peak of the 9/11 hard market. I would not have guessed that, but it's, here's a proof that that's the case. And notable too, if you expect, as I do, that liability premiums are going to increase faster than GDP in 2025, that means the 2025 ratio will tick higher, and that'll make that peak spanning particularly, probably 22 to call it 2022 to 2025. That'll make for a fairly broad peak, higher than the 9/11 peak, and even maybe not higher than the mid 80s hard market, but certainly at that point it'll be a broader and longer lasting peak. So really interesting, I think, and it suggests to us that we've kind of changed here from something's got to give to something seems likely to give. Perhaps that's more tort reform. So thanks for listening. I'm going to sign off now, and there is a part 2 to this if you choose to pursue kind of the summary that way. Thanks again for your interest in our work.